highly realistic mock-up of a plane crash helps prepare for the worst. The Peak District is one of the areas aircraft are ordered to ground themselves in an emergency, so this training exercise for the emergency services involved is as true to life as possible.
We've got over 90 mountain rescue volunteers coming to the day to do the searching, the rescuing, the triaging. We're also working with fire, ambulance, heart, police. We've got Army coming in, we've got the Civil Aviation Authority. So the actual scale of it is huge.
Can you feel your legs at the moment? Can you wiggle your toes? Yeah.
As well as treating casualties in the fragmented fuselage, rescuers must find injured survivors in the surrounding cliffs, a scenario sadly drawn from experience.
If you remember back to Lockerbie nearly 40 years ago, that's where mountain rescue was heavily involved with, where we were effectively searching over 100 square miles of countryside.
I'm actually doing the Craig lead for getting people off the slopes and evacuating to the holding station here so they can be delivered to hospital in the ambulance.
Although logistics are tested to the limit, it's also an exercise in collaboration. It requires organisation, cooperation and cool heads.
There's been no power struggles or ego trips. You know, we wear different colours, but we've all got the same goal.
The setup took a year to plan. Disasters, of course, can happen in seconds. But thorough training like this helps those on the rescue front line feel ready and able to help when most needed.
Kathy Killick, BBC News.
That is all from us for today. Breakfast back at 6 o'clock tomorrow.
Have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Conflict rages in the Middle East, an explosive resignation from Labour. And here in Birmingham, the Tory rivals gather. There's tons to talk about. Good morning. Morning. Well, Kemi Badenoch, the former Business Secretary, and Robert Jenrick, the former Immigration Minister. They seem to be the two front runners for the Tory crown, and they're both with us this morning. Now, in the interest of fairness, we're going to toss a coin to see who gets to go first. So, Kemi, if it's heads, you get to pick if you want to be first or second. So, you both up for it? OK. Very risky thing to do on live television. It's tails. OK, so, Robert Jenrick, would you like to go first or second?
I'll go first.
You'll go first, OK. And before we do our interviews with you a bit later in the programme, tell us something that you like about each other. Kemi, what's something you like about Robert?
I like the fact that he is a good family man.
And Robert, what's something you like about Kemi?
I like her directness.
And is there something that you disagree with Robert about that you know of at this point, Kemi?
We actually agree on quite a lot. We have disagreements on immigration policy, but they are minor in the grand scheme of things.
OK, I think we'll talk about that a lot this morning. Is something you disagree with Kemi about?
Yeah, we do disagree on how we solve this migration puzzle, but I think you're going to ask us that in a few minutes' time.
I think we'll certainly get into it. And Robert, you'll be first, Kemi, you'll be second, but thanks both for being with us in Birmingham this morning. Well, we'll hear later from the Labour MP, now formerly Labour MP, Rosie Duffield, who quit the party dramatically yesterday, accusing Keir Starmer of putting greed and power first.
here we are, and it's daily revelations of hypocrisy and grubby kind of presence and things. I mean, I can't believe what I'm reading.
Well, how will Cabinet Minister Pat McFadden, one of the most senior ministers and allies of Keir Starmer, join us this morning? He's joining us this morning, and how will he respond? Forgive me. And joining us throughout the show, we have Tom Fletcher, who used to be ambassador for the UK in Lebanon and worked for 3 different prime ministers in Number 10. Jake Berry, former chair of the Tory party under Liz Truss, and Penny Mordaunt, former cabinet minister who ran for the leadership last time. Warm welcome to all 3 of you here. But first, let's take a look at what is serious news this morning. This is the live picture of what's happening in Beirut in Lebanon. There's huge attention on what happened there, where the leader of the proscribed terror group Hezbollah was killed by an Israeli strike. Those tensions make the front page of The Observer and The Independent this morning, both reporting on the aggression between Israel and Iran that backs Hezbollah. The Sunday Telegraph splashes on Rosie Duffield quitting Labour over what it describes as the freebie scandal, and it headlines a claim from Kemi Badenoch that not all cultures are equally valid. We'll talk to her about that later. And the Mail on Sunday has Boris Johnson in the latest of the serialisation of his book, saying he is now convinced that COVID was made in a Chinese lab. So there's a lot to talk about this morning. Let's start with Lebanon, where anxiety is high. The country has declared 5 days of mourning of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader. Tens of thousands of people have fled. And there are, of course, fears among those with British connections who are still there, as flights and ferries to get out are, many of them, being cancelled or suspended. An hour ago, I spoke to Emma Bartholomew, a British citizen who's trying to get home.
I'm very fortunate, and I realise how fortunate I am now just because of the sheer lack of flights available. Early last week, I managed to bring an existing flight forward, and I'm booked on one currently next weekend. So that feels like a very lucky find. But of course, as the situation has escalated, I have been looking into any alternative options, sooner flights, anything that might be available. And there's simply nothing.
In terms of the safety and security of the airport, though, is that changing? We've heard that there might have been bombardment getting very close to the airport.
Yes, we did hear reports of that and see quite daunting images of that last night. And I've seen passenger footage of flames and explosions as people have either been landing or taking off.
Do you feel that the British government has been helping you try to leave?
So far, I think the contact has been fairly minimal, to be honest. They have made sure that all of us British citizens who are here in Lebanon are registered. And I think perhaps naively, I was hopeful that we might receive some evacuation information by this point. But I balance that with genuinely understanding that this is a really challenging and really changeable time. And so I did speak to an emergency consular assistant in the London office yesterday. I think that the local office is probably operating on a very skeleton staff situation at the moment, which again is understandable, but equally can be slightly alarming when we're trying to communicate with them.
Well, of course, we wish Emma and anyone else trying to get home well with trying to do that. Tom, can you help us here with the basics? It's a really complicated situation, but Hassan Nasrallah's killing in the last couple of days, has that changed things?
It's changed everything. The region is on the brink of a really dangerous, catastrophic escalation, and civilians across Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, and far beyond are braced for that moment. This was another seismic moment, really, in a year of seismic moments in the region. Hassan Nasrallah was the most powerful person, not just in Lebanon, but one of the most powerful people in the Middle East. I remember many evenings sat there with the bodyguards, listening to his broadcasts, wondering whether we were safe or not, whether the region would tip further into danger or away from it. The reality was he could have taken me out any time he wanted, and he took out many of his opponents. He exercised enormous hard power street muscle, but also soft power. He controlled the social infrastructure in the south, was an extraordinary communicator, a sort of malign genius. And we're now waiting to see whether the hardliners in Tehran, in Tel Aviv and elsewhere will dial this up, which would have horrific civilian consequences.
Penny, as Defence Secretary and other jobs that you did, you've been in those kinds of meetings in government when you have huge, complicated and anxiety-inducing events like this. What do you think the thinking in government will be at the moment about this?
Well, the immediate priority is the safety of British nationals, and a huge amount of work is going on for that with our armed forces. But the key to this is really Israel's security. Israel does care about international humanitarian law. It cares about the principle of proportionality. And we need to understand how what they have found in Gaza has rocked them, and that they view what they are doing as a proportionate response. So that needs to be the focus for the British government, Israel's security, and ensuring that the plan that is on the table is agreed to. That's very difficult, but that needs to be the diplomatic focus.
OK, we'll talk about that more later in the programme, because, of course, in the last few days, the diplomacy from the UK and the US didn't come to anything because we ended up in this worse situation. Jake, though, let's turn to what's happening here. As a senior Tory who's seen the party through many ups and downs, how would you describe the state of the Tory party now as they're looking at each other and wondering who the answer might be?
Well, I think the ex-senior Tory is a better description. But first of all, it's great to be back in Birmingham for the conference. It's a great city. We love coming here. But and in a way, for the Conservative Party, it's a really important conference. We've had a terrible election defeat. A lot of the conference will be dominated, not quite with a post-mortem, but looking why the offer we made to the British people was so roundly rejected. But also at the same time, we'll be looking to the future about who's going to lead the official opposition to take on the Labour Party to make sure that we can get ourselves fighting fit to serve the British people again. And it's not just enough for us as a party. Actually, speaking to a lot of delegates, they feel quite upbeat because the Labour Party is making such a mess of things. But that's not the same thing as the Conservative Party being fighting fit again. We're going to hear from all the candidates here, and I hope the members who see the 4 fantastic candidates we've got make the right choice.
OK, well, let's hear from 2 of them then this morning, because that's why we're here in Birmingham, and it'll be an unusual conference. There'll be no leader's speech, but 4 wannabe leaders' speeches. We've already heard in the last couple of weeks from Tom Tugendhat and James Cleverly on the programme, and Robert Jenrick and Kemi Badenoch, who are both chasing for the job, are here this morning. Robert is the first up. He won the coin toss, and he started his career as a solicitor. Then he became the MP for Newark in 2014. He rose to become Housing Secretary in the government, then Immigration Minister, and then he quit over Rishi Sunak's approach, saying he hadn't gone far enough. You might well remember him coming blasting into our studio one Sunday with his reasons why. So let's speak to him this morning. Now, Robert, just after the election, you said the reason you lost was fundamentally you failed to keep your promises that you'd made to the public. Immigration is the thing that you've raised time and time again. Is it, above all else, the thing that you would put at the top of your list to fix?
It is, Laura, but it's not the only thing. In fact, in the article that I wrote in the hours after the election, and then I came on your show that weekend, I said that we failed to deliver on the economy, on the NHS and our borders. So there are multiple failures that we need to acknowledge as a party, whilst obviously defending the things we got right in government. And then we've got to listen to the public and set out serious answers to those challenges. I've spent the last few months thinking very deeply about how we do that. And I don't want to waste the next 5 years debating those things. That's a recipe for more infighting and for further loss of public trust. I want to use this leadership contest for us to settle those things and have a clear plan as to how we take our party and our country forward. And I have that in particular on immigration.
In terms of immigration, though, as you've said, you lost your reputation on immigration, but also in terms of managing the economy. And that's always been what the Conservatives put front and centre, and we're very proud of that. Many businesses would say, actually, if you take a much firmer line on immigration, if you really cut the numbers, actually there'll be a price to pay. The economy would suffer as a result. Are you willing to see the economy not grow as quickly or even take a hit if you're able to do your number one priority and cut the numbers of immigrants?
Well, firstly, I do want to get the economy growing faster again. I want to reclaim the mantle for the Conservative Party of low tax and pro-growth. But I don't agree that the age of mass migration has made our country richer. You know, in the 25 years since Tony Blair became Prime Minister, we've had 5.9 million people coming into our country legally. It was 59,000 in the 25 years prior to that. And this has not been a period of record growth, record productivity growth. In fact, far from it. I wrote a report earlier in the year that set out that the level of migration and the types of people coming into our country, which are mostly low-wage, low-skilled people, are actually costing the economy money. And the OBR, you might have noticed in the summer, actually said that I was right on that
But there's a question of principle, though, here, isn't there? That many people want to see immigration come down, but many people also want there to be enough carers in the social care sector, for example. They want there to be enough nurses in the NHS. They want there to be enough people available to work in the bars and restaurants, maybe when they, you know, go to London for a special weekend of treats. It's an important question of principle. Would you be willing to see jobs stay vacant, the economy perhaps shrink or not grow as fast as you would like it to, but if the numbers of immigrants came down, would that be a price worth paying?
Well, firstly, and this is an important point of difference in this leadership contest, I do think we have to make clear that we're going to do this time, because we lost so much trust by failing to deliver this in the past. And so that means Parliament setting a legally binding cap on migration in the tens of thousands or lower. Otherwise, politicians can't look the public in the eye and say, this is definitely happening. And that was at the heart of the reason I resigned as a minister, because I didn't want to be just another minister who made and broke promises.
But
on your specific point,
that might have.
I don't pretend that ending this era of mass migration is going to be plain sailing. It requires us to link up our skills policy and our welfare policy and have a proper plan as to how we handle this. But I don't think that it needs to cost us money. There are millions of people in our country who are on welfare. I want to help those people into the dignity and the security of work. I want to ensure that we are paying care workers more money. That is a better way for our country to conduct itself, rather than bringing in people from overseas who don't come with them with roads and hospital beds and homes.
And all of those things may be desirable, but would you be willing to see jobs go unfilled in order to get the numbers of people moving to this country to come down?
Well, I don't think that's going to happen, Laura, but I do think that this is an absolutely central challenge. So if you're asking me, would I prioritise this? Yes, I would, because I think our party and the politics more generally has lost so much trust, not just in recent years, but throughout my whole adult lifetime, because politician after politician has promised to fix this problem, to control and reduce migration, and then have done precisely the opposite. I'm not prepared to do that, and that's why we have to have this cap set by Parliament, because that is a democratic lock so that we can say to the public, enough. This is going to happen next time.
But some people might say, actually, the problem has not been what the particular definitions or the particular targets. Your government had a target, not a legally binding target, but a target for many, many years. Some people have looked at this and actually think that the Home Office, where you were a minister, has been a shambles, and that is why immigration policy has failed, is because the backlogs of the lists of people waiting for their cases to be considered has gone up and up and up. The people have been put up in hotels, which has cost billions. Actually, you were a minister in the government department that was meant to sort this out, and it failed. Don't you have responsibility for part of
Laura, when I was in the Home Office, I entered a department in ashes. And over my year in the Home Office, I worked relentlessly on legal migration to secure the biggest change to that system in my lifetime. Will ensure that the number of people coming into our country legally goes down by around 300,000. And you can already see that flowing into the numbers. And on illegal migration, I was the only minister who reduced the number of people coming across on small boats. And I got the number of deportations in this country up by 80% in a year. But it wasn't enough. That's why I ultimately resigned, because I wasn't able to persuade the Prime Minister and those who were in Cabinet at that time of the need to do more.
Opposition is about the art of persuasion. So you failed to persuade your colleagues. You also failed to persuade your colleagues when you were Housing Minister. You didn't manage to build more houses. You didn't get the planning reforms through. Being the leader of the opposition is the job that probably needs more persuasion than any other job in politics. If you couldn't persuade your colleagues, how do you think you could persuade the country to take another look at the Tories?
Laura, I did get the number of homes up. In fact, under my tenure, the number of homes being built in this country, housing starts, reached the highest level since 1987 and then fell back after I was there. So my record on this is strong. But on illegal migration, the point you're asking me, There is no way that we will fix this merely by tinkering around the edges, improving the Home Office, changing processes. I've done those things, trust me. I've thought about this in great depth. We will never secure our borders. We will never get dangerous criminals and terrorists out of our country unless we leave the European Convention on Human Rights.
And that's something that we've talked about with you before, and I think we'll talk to Kemi Badenoch about also in a few minutes. Do you agree with your rival, Kemi Badenoch, that some cultures are less valid than others?
Look, I think culture matters for integration. That's an important question. But where Kemi and I do disagree is on the fact that numbers also matter. That is ultimately what's putting the pressure on housing, on public services and community cohesion. So you have to have that cap, or else we'll continue to let the public down and operate an essentially open borders system. And we also disagree on the centrality of leaving the European Convention on Human Rights. Just saying, I'll have a plan in a few years' time is a recipe for infighting and for losing the public's trust. I have a plan. I want us to get on and start to implement that when we're lucky enough to be in government again.
A few brief questions, then we must move on to Kemi Badenoch. Do you still back Donald Trump, even though now he's a convicted felon? He's been found liable for sexual abuse and he's been spreading lies about Haitian immigrants in the US.
Look, I'm a Conservative. The Conservative Party has strong and historic links to the Republican Party. So it is natural that we would lean towards Republican candidates. It's clearly going to be a close race. I respect Kamala Harris. I would obviously seek to work productively and constructively with whoever is the next president of the United States.
Trump, yes
I think it's normal, it is natural for a Conservative to lean towards Republican candidates.
So
but
you
I
still
will work with
backing Donald
whoever
Trump?
is president
Well,
of the
that's
United
interesting
States.
because it sounds like you won't now say you're backing Donald Trump, which you used to
No,
say explicitly.
No, I've said, look, I, as a Conservative, lean towards the Republican Party. It's natural that we would back their candidates. But as a future leader of the opposition, prospective Prime Minister of our country, of course I would work with whoever leads the United States.
Theresa May says you should be more worried about the Lib Dems. So for you, who's the bigger enemy, Nigel Farage or Ed Davey?
Look, I want to take on both. I want us to take on both. I don't believe that you have to pick a lane. I want to bring back the millions of people we lost to reform by leaving the ECHR, by ending the era of mass migration, and I want to bring back the people we've lost to the Lib Dems and the Labour Party.
Robert Jenrick. Last question. In one word, what's the most Conservative thing about you?
Look, I believe in opportunity. I believe in opportunity. I grew up here in the West Midlands to working-class parents who came here, started a small business. My values are rooted in my family, the places that I've lived in, the small town in Nottinghamshire I represent. I want the Conservative Party, Laura, to be the trade union for the working people of this country.
OK, we will see what happens in the next few days. Robert Jenrick, thank you very much
Thank
indeed.
you.
It's always good to have you on the programme. Well, he told us this morning he's going to be going to 50 events in the next few days. All four candidates are going to be put through their paces on the main stage. They'll be taking questions from people who've come, who'll be sitting in the audience. They'll all be giving a 20-minute speech on Wednesday afternoon. So whoever manages to make it through that has then still got another few weeks of the leadership contest to get through. But on October the 9th and 10th, Tory MPs will whittle it down to the final two. Kemi Badenoch looks like, if you talk to people around here, that she will be one of the final pair. But let's see. She started her career as a software engineer. She then worked in the financial sector and she became an MP in 2017. Then she was the Trade Secretary in the Cabinet and now she is the Shadow Housing Secretary. A warm welcome to you this morning, Kemi Badenoch. Thanks for being here in Birmingham with us. Now, you've written this morning about immigration. And you write that we cannot assume that all cultures are equally valid. So which cultures, in your view, are less valid than others?
Oh, lots. Cultures that believe in child marriage, for instance, or that women don't have equal rights. I actually think it's extraordinary that people think that's an unusual or controversial thing to say. Of course, not all cultures are equally valid. I don't believe in cultural relativism. I believe in Western values, the principles which have made this country great. And I think that we need to make sure that we continue to abide by those principles to keep the society that we have now.
So which particular cultures, then, would you say are less valid? Because, as you've said, your words, not mine, some people think that that is a controversial thing to say. So which cultures would you specifically say are less valid than others?
So it's not about labelling cultures. Culture includes a lot of things. I'm not talking about cuisine, I'm talking about customs. And I think that cultures where women are told that they should not work, I would knock on doors. I'm sure Penny and Jake had this. You'd knock on doors and you'd see somebody at the door who says, oh, I can't speak to you, I will get my husband. I don't think that's as equally valid as our culture. But the point I was making in the op-ed was about immigration, that immigration is something which we need to make sure we get right. We didn't before. And there were 3 things I said we needed to do. 1, numbers matter. I was quite surprised that Rob actually misrepresented what I've been saying. Numbers do matter. Culture matters even more. Who comes into the country is absolutely critical. And leadership. You need to start from the top. It's no good simply saying we're going to lower immigration and outsource it. It has to come very much from the Prime Minister himself or herself.
Are you saying, though, that if somebody in their culture who lives here in the UK, who might be a British citizen, who answered the door to you and said, I won't speak to you, I'd like you to speak to my husband instead, are you saying, you have said their culture is less valid, are you saying that people with those beliefs shouldn't be welcome in the UK?
I am saying that if we want to have a well-integrated society, we need to make sure that we have a shared culture and a shared identity. This is a multi-ethnic society. That's obvious. I'm a black woman sitting here talking to you. But there is a difference between being multi-ethnic and being multicultural. I grew up in a place that was multicultural, and yet everybody looked the same. Conflict arises when you emphasize difference. We need to emphasize the thing that we share. Being British, British values, the things that we talked about, freedom, equal rights, personal responsibility, not discriminating people because of their sexual orientation. There are some cultures that do that. I don't think that a culture that thinks gay people should be stoned is as valid as ours. This is not a controversial thing to say.
But aren't you, by making this point, which people will judge for themselves, they will maybe, I'm sure many people will be interested to hear what you say, aren't you, in fact, emphasising difference by making this point? You are saying that if somebody lives in this country already, they answered the door to you here, and they said, I'd rather you spoke to my husband, you are judging their culture to be less valid than your own. You are emphasising that difference.
What are you suggesting that politicians should do in that case, then? That we should just accept everything, that everything is fine, and that we should not comment on what kind of social relations we should have? I don't think that's right. It is our job to make sure that the people who come into the country are people who love this country, who want it to succeed. And I want this country's culture to stay the same. I left another country and came here because I thought it was better. I don't want this place to turn into the place that I was running away from.
You say in your piece also you were struck by the number of immigrants who hate Israel, to use your words. Who do you mean, and how do you know that?
Well, because we're seeing it on social media, we're hearing it. One of the things that I found most upsetting after October 7th was watching people rip down posters of missing, kidnapped children from walls and lampposts in London. We've never seen that here before. I think that is beyond the pale.
How do you know that people who did that are recent immigrants? And if you say you saw that on social media, do you think social media is always a reliable source from where to get your views?
Well, we can get into the nitty-gritty of that. I didn't say only recent immigrants hate Israel. I said I am struck by the number of recent immigrants who hate Israel. It is quite clear that there are many people who have recently come to this country who have brought views from where they used to be, from their countries of origin, that have no place here. It is not just about Israel. I saw, as Equalities Minister, people bringing cultural disputes from India to the streets of Leicester. I've seen it even amongst African groups. We need to make sure that when people come to this country, they leave their previous differences behind. This is not a controversial thing to say. But
the
even
thing that you pick out, forgive me, the thing that you pick out in your own words, you pick out in your piece, you say you were struck by the number of immigrants who hate Israel.
Yes.
Now, we're sitting here in Birmingham, one of the country's most diverse cities. There's an implication there that you are talking about.
I think you're the one making the implication.
No, I'm asking you the question to be specific about who you mean, because these are sensitive topics. It's important to be really clear.
I don't know.
So when you say recent immigrants who hate Israel, who do you specifically mean?
I know what you're trying to do, Laura. You want me to say Muslims, but it isn't all Muslims. So I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to play this game. I should be able to say that I have made an observation without you trying to portray it as me attacking a particular group. I know that's what you'd like to say.
I'm not trying to portray it in any way. I'm asking you, on what evidence do you base this claim? Who are you talking about?
I told you things that people write, people I've met, observations. I talked about people ripping down posters. We saw who was doing it. We read about cases. I have answered the question multiple times, but I know what you are trying to get me to say, and I'm challenging you that we need to be able to have these conversations without being scared, without running away. And this is what I'm bringing to this contest. I'm sitting here not because of that one line, but because I'm running for the Conservative Party leadership. And this is one of the things that has meant we've lost votes, that we've stopped saying difficult things. We need to be able to speak with moral clarity, with honesty. If we don't do so, then we leave a vacuum for other people who are not, who are not as mainstream as us, to do things that will create even more social tension.
And I'm not trying to get you to do anything.
We have to take the responsibility.
You say, and you have a reputation for speaking with clarity and saying what you think, and that is precisely why I've been trying to get you to spell out exactly what you mean when you have said these things. And you're right, it's a very interesting and important debate, but being exact and specific about what you mean, I think, is what people watching will want you to do. And if you don't spell these things out very clearly, as you said, you leave room for doubt.
That's true, but I can't list the names of every single person who hates Israel. I am making an observation that we need to make sure that we uphold our values in this country and we don't allow it to turn into the place that millions of people around the world are running from.
Should people who hold those views then, are they not welcome in the UK?
I don't think that people who bring foreign conflicts here should be welcome. I don't think so. People who come here should want to live in Britain, should love the country, they should want to contribute and want it to succeed. We are not a dormitory. This is our home. Having people from all around the world just living here in their little bubbles and little groups is a recipe for disaster. I have seen it. I told you I grew up in a country with 300 different ethnic groups. This is a recipe for conflict, and a government needs to work hard on integration. You can't just sit back and say, well, as long as you get a good job and don't commit crimes, that's fine. That is too low a bar.
OK, we don't have much time, so I want to ask you a few brief questions just to close. Should the NHS be free at the point of use forever?
That is a consensus that we have in this country. There are many ways to deliver a free at the point of use service that doesn't require the government to be involved in every aspect.
But does it stand as a principle? Because you told the Times, I don't think we're ready for changing the principle as free at the point of use, certainly not immediately. Now, that implies that one day you might think that should change, and maybe it should.
It might be that the public decide that.
But what's your view?
I've just given you my view.
That people shouldn't do it yet, but it might one day you might want to change that.
Well, I can't say whether I might change my mind in the future. I'm telling you what I think now.
OK. Will you commit to 3% of GDP defence spending, yes or no?
Yes, we have already. That was something that we committed to in the last government.
3%?
Yes.
By when?
That's not a date that I can give. And one of the things that I'm trying to do is make sure that we start with principles rather than just making announcements and setting targets.
Okay.
We set targets that we can't deliver. People don't trust us.
Okay. And what's the most conservative thing about you, in one word?
Personal responsibility. It is, I think, the value that distinguishes us from all of the left-wing parties, and we don't have enough of it in the country at the moment.
OK, 2 words, but we'll give you them. Kemi Badenoch, thanks very much indeed for being with us.
Thank
I know
you.
It's a hugely busy week for you all here in the Tory conference in Birmingham.
Thank you.
Well, let us know what you think. You can always email us, kuenssburg@bbc.co.uk, or if you're social media minded, use the hashtag BBC Laura K, and as ever, we will try to use some of the conversation later in the show. And you can watch the BBC Live page as everything is happening, and the address should be up there on the screen for you. Well then, let's go to our panel. So, Penny Mordaunt, you've run to be Tory leader. You know what it's like to sit and be put through your paces. It's interesting and notable, both of who are seen as the front runners are focusing very much on immigration. What did you make of what you heard?
Well, irritatingly for you, I'm supporting all 4 candidates this week. It takes courage to do what they're doing. I've been there, and I want them all to have a good week and make us proud.
Are you comfortable, though, with the kinds of things actually that both of them are saying, but particularly what Kemi Badenoch is saying about cultures being less valid than each other? Do you think some cultures are less valid than others?
This week is not about me. It's about all of us as a party. And I think the most important thing, I mean, the good news is, across the country, Conservative values are alive and well. But we have to reconnect our party with them. They're the values of this country. That's what we need to do. That is more important than particular personalities or policies at this stage.
But some of your colleagues, Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, wrote an article yesterday saying she's concerned about the party going to the right. There was an implicit criticism in there, actually, on Kemi Badenoch and Robert Jenrick, both of trying to appeal to reform voters. Are you concerned that the party might move to the right?
I think that policy and personality is not the most important thing right now.
Really?
There's less than 2% of this country are a member of a political party. People don't view their life through that prism. What we have to do is demonstrate that we are back in the service of the people of this country. That, to me, is the most important thing, beyond any policy position.
But how do you do that, though?
Well, I'll be talking about that later on today, Laura. The party chairman recognises this, I think, and he's asked me and Lord Hannan to do a piece of work to help us reconnect with the nation. So more on that later.
OK, well, why do you think you lost, though? I mean, you've heard the pictures, and I know you don't want to get personal, but why do you think you lost? And you had a very marginal seat. I know you fought it very, very hard. What went wrong for you?
Because I think that our values as a party and our success as a party has been because they've been in tune with the people of this country. And for all sorts of reasons and all sorts of things that we did, including things during the election campaign, people didn't see that anymore.
What about the D-Day visit that went so badly wrong for the former Prime Minister and a proud military community in your old constituency?
That's a great example of exactly what I'm talking about. The good news for us is that those same values that the British public hold dear now are causing them to be rather iffy about their new Prime Minister. There's an opportunity there, but we cannot be complacent. We have to demonstrate that we are here in the service of the nation, and they are our only care.
Jake, what do you make of what both the candidates had to say then?
Well, I thought it was an excellent outing for both of them, but I think what we learnt from both Kemi and Rob there is that actually they're really talking about a battle for ideology. Which direction is the Conservative Party going to go in? It's probably now is the right time to have it. But if we want to win the next general election, we've actually got to start talking about everything else. What are the hospitals going to be like? What's the school that your kid attends going to be like? And it's only once we've won back people's trust to represent them as a government rather than a pressure group on immigration or a pressure group on cultural issues, that we will actually stand a chance of beating this Labour government. And that really, really matters, because what we've seen from the Labour Party so far is they've spent 14 years preparing to come into government, and they didn't really have a plan when they came in. And that's why opposition, and who is the leader of the opposition, is really, really important, that we have someone who's fighting for the values that Penny and I hold dear, which are those core Conservative values of common sense, personal responsibility, lower taxation.
And do you think there is, though, a risk of that? I mean, you've hinted you think there is a risk that you become a sort of pressure group on immigration.
Well, look, I thought both of them performed excellently. I'm sure both of them can be great leaders of the Conservative Party. What they're doing at the moment is they're setting out to the Conservative Party membership, I guess, what they think is appealing to them. Look, I'm out there, I'm backing Tom Tugendhat, because I think actually Tom and, in all fairness, James Cleverly as well, have set out a much broader set of policies designed to appeal to Conservative Party members.
Tom, as a former number 10 insider, and you work for 3 different prime ministers, so you don't have specific skin in this game, though. But as somebody who now works in higher education, but who used to be a diplomat going around the world, promoting Britain's image and working with governments everywhere, what do you make of the pickle that the Conservatives have got themselves into?
Well, as you say, I'm a diplomat, I'm a former civil servant, so I'm more used to commenting on other people's elections than our own elections. I think the world has been watching the UK over the last decade and worries at times we've lost our reputation for competence. The world thinks we're quite good at banking and politics and diplomacy and the creative industries, and at moments it's seen us wobbling on those. And I saw in number 10, it's getting harder and harder to govern. It's not a political point about one party or the other. It's harder for liberal democracies to be strategic. We're often being outthought by autocracies who are there for a much longer time. And the world is getting tougher. It's a driverless world out there. And what I observe in so many elections, so many campaigns, countries like Lebanon, where 19 different religions are coexisting, is that the great dividing line now is between people who believe that the answer to these challenges we face is to just build a bigger wall, and people who believe in coexistence. And as a diplomat, I believe we should find ways to live together, that we have more in common than what divides us.
And Penny, talking privately to a lot of your colleagues in the last few days, what's quite a few of them have said to me is, I don't think that any of the 4 are likely to be the next Conservative Prime Minister. One source actually even joked that the next Tory Prime Minister might actually still be at school. Are you confident that one of the four has actually got what it takes to make it to number 10?
I think so. I think we've got four great candidates, but this is about all of us. We all have to take responsibility for the shape of our party, our messages, and the work that we do in our communities. And you know, if we are going to reconnect the nation, then the grassroots of this party are going to be absolutely vital in that.
Sounds to me like you're not at all done in politics.
Well, I'm here, aren't I? I'm on your panel
Yeah,
this morning.
I'm
I'm
here
here
to help again another time.
I'm here to help, Laura.
Fancy a seat
you
again
don't
another
need
time?
letters after your name to be of use and service to the country.
But you fancy going back to the green benches one day?
Of course, I loved my time there, but when Aqaba, which is not a spa in Marrakesh, it is the Committee on Business Appointments, lifts its ban on ministerial jobs, I will announce what I'm going to do, but it will be wholly in the service of this country.
OK, I know also you've been spending a lot of time in America and indeed in Ukraine, and the new government, I think, Tom, has found that huge amounts of time have had to be devoted to foreign affairs in ways that they might not have anticipated. Let's then return to Lebanon and all the complexities of what has gone on there. You know, if we go back this time last week, David Lammy, Keir Starmer, off to New York. They thought they were going to be able to, or at least there was a chance of brokering a ceasefire. The last time we spoke to David Lammy, he even said he thought there was a 90% chance of a ceasefire on the Gaza end of all of this. And yet the situation just seems to become worse and worse. So what's gone wrong in this last few days?
It's very, very tough. And as you say, you know, the world comes at you fast when you enter number 10. I think Keir Starmer had the busiest first month of any Prime Minister on foreign policy since the Second World War. And there was loads of confidence. You know, I talked to a lot of diplomats, UK, American, French, regional diplomats who were in New York this week. And Wednesday night, Thursday morning, they felt they'd got this window for a 21-day ceasefire. The Americans had cleared that, of course, with the Israelis as well. And then Netanyahu, Prime Minister Netanyahu of Israel, turned up, shook his fist from the podium and said, we're going to take it up another level. So I think diplomats do feel quite despondent at this moment. But you know, George Mitchell said diplomacy is 799 days of failure and one of success. You've got to keep getting back in there and keep trying to create the conditions for that ceasefire.
But you talked there about Netanyahu, the Israeli leader. I mean, for months and months and months and months, Western countries have been urging restraint in Gaza. For many months, Western countries have been working hard to try to stop things getting worse in the northern end of things between Lebanon and Israel. Why did people think that he would listen this time? I mean, was there naivety there?
You have to keep trying. I mean, what other choice do we have at the moment? I think now you've got to think about how we frame the argument. And I think the argument to take to the harder liners in Israel, for example, is to say a ground invasion will embolden Hezbollah again. It will give them back the popularity and legitimacy that has drained away from them in recent years. And to say to the Iranians, you know, it's just not in your interest for this to escalate. You know, don't dial up the violence across the regions through the militias, through the Houthis, through Hezbollah itself. The diplomats have to just keep going because actually the route to calming down the whole region does lie in that Gaza ceasefire and ultimately in the two-state solution. You have to find security, justice, opportunity for Israelis, Palestinians and the Lebanese.
Jake, do you think that foreign policy will be much of a feature of this week? I mean, it's such a sensitive and difficult issue, but do you think it will be part of the debate around who's next for the Tory leader?
Yeah, I'm sure it will be. I go back to my earlier point about you have to come together as a party and look like you as the official opposition or potentially a government in waiting. It would be absolutely bizarre if the Conservative Party and its leadership hopefuls didn't talk about this hugely, hugely important issue. I think just going back to the Americans and the hope for a ceasefire, I mean, my reading of it is that the Americans really started to push this idea, as did our government and our Foreign Secretary David Lammy, because it was the Israelis themselves who started to push this as an option. We then saw a significant escalation with the Israelis in defence of themselves attacking the Lebanon. And I think really it's linked to the fact that it's an American election year that I think Netanyahu and the Israeli government are working in the belief that no American president in an election year are going to turn their back on the Israelis. They are their longest and strongest allies. And I don't think we're going to see a ceasefire. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think we're going to see significant progress or a ceasefire until those American elections are done in November.
Well, that's a reminder of just how interconnected everything is. We'll be back with the three of you a bit later in the programme. Thank you very much for now. Well, whether it's been winter fuel or freebies, the new government has not had the smooth start that it might have dreamt of. And the criticism has not even been from only their rivals. But late last night, it came, my goodness, it came from one of their own. Rosie Duffield was the Labour MP for Canterbury, but she quit, blasting Keir Starmer for sleaze, avarice and a lack of political judgment. That's on Number 10's door, and they have to deal with that international crisis we've just been discussing. Well, one of the most senior members of the Cabinet, Pat McFadden, the Cabinet Office Minister, is with us from London this morning. Good morning to you. We'll speak to you in a second, but this, first of all, is what a very angry Rosie Duffield told me last night.
I'm ashamed of the fact that we stood up rightly and condemned all of the last few years of Tory, what we saw as Tory sleaze, and all of the things that, brought politics into disrepute. And we've always held ourselves up as this, a party that's better, that will do better, that will clear out the rot. And here we are, and it's daily revelations of hypocrisy and grubby kind of presence and things. I mean, I can't believe what I'm reading every single day. And, all of us had donations for the election. I didn't like it, but I had to crowdfund because I got no money at all from unions or the party this time. And you feel a bit grubby doing that, actually, if I'm honest with you. But I had some lovely friends and some generous donations myself for leaflets and things. But when you've got people with so much more money than the average person spending somebody's yearly salary on their own clothes without feeling that they have to apologise or explain it, I just feel like I'm not getting anywhere with trying to get that from my leader, and I needed to go. It feels, it's greed. Why else would someone on so much more money than most people take free gifts? Why? He can absolutely afford his own clothes. We all can, and I've seen journalists asking him, and he hasn't answered. He hasn't actually explained. And he doesn't have separate meetings with backbench MPs. So we're watching the telly the same as everyone else. And I haven't seen anything that explains why that's okay. And then to see us cutting the money to people who earn a fraction of what we do, it's mass hypocrisy. I can't be a part of that.
But the relationship between you and the leadership has been strained for a long time. Some people will think, why now, so soon after the election? And what do you say to people who voted for you as a Labour MP?
I'm desperately sorry. It is not at all where I wanted to be. I never thought in a million years I would leave this party. I'm trying not to get upset when I'm saying that, because it's in your soul and your heart, and particularly someone like me. I'm from a very different background to Keir Starmer, I think, and I was a single mum who needed the Labour Party, and since we were last in power, all I've done is deliver those leaflets myself and beg the public to return a Labour government. And it's just so profoundly disappointing to me as a Labour voter and an activist and a former, recipient of tax credits in a low-paid job, to just see that this is what we've become. And it's more about greed and power than it is about making a difference. And I can't take it anymore, I'm afraid.
Do you think he has a problem with women?
I'm afraid I do, yes. I've experienced it myself, but most backbenchers that I'm friends with are women, and most of us refer to the men that surround them, the young men, as the lads, and it's very clear that the lads are in charge. They've now got their Downing Street passes. They're the same lads that were there briefing against me in the papers and other prominent female MPs. And, I was really hoping for better, but it wasn't to be.
Rosie Duffield, thank you. Well, Pat McFadden listening to that there in London with us. Sleaze, avarice, greed. How do you respond to those claims from Rosie Duffield?
Well, when I read Rosie's letter last night and listening to the interview there, I think you can see that she's been disillusioned with the party leader, with the party maybe more generally, for quite a long time. I don't think this is something that's just developed in the last few months. I'm disappointed to see her go. I like Rosie, but ultimately I'm not surprised at the decision that she's made.
She's very clear, though, what seems to have pushed her over the edge is the revelations about the amount of money that Keir Starmer and many of your colleagues have taken from donations, thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds, including on free clothes. We know now Keir Starmer accepted £32,000 for clothes. Now, if you go to anything like a normal shop, that could buy you hundreds and hundreds of suits. So can you tell our viewers why somebody who earns more than £100,000 needs free clothes?
These are in effect campaign donations, and presentation, whether we like it or not, is part of a campaign. I am grateful to Wahid Ali for the support he's shown Labour. I think there would be more in this if there was any suggestion of giving X to get Y, but there is no getting Y here. This is someone who's been a long-time Labour supporter, who's donated to Labour for many years, who's supported a number of Labour politicians, and that's what he did in this way in supporting the campaign. This has been declared, and we'll always try and declare things, and that's important for us to do, and I don't think there's any equivalence at all between that kind of campaign donation and some of the stuff that went on in recent years, losing billions in COVID waste and fraud, parties against lockdown rules in Number 10. These are not equivalent things at all. We take these rules seriously.
And no one this morning, Pat McFadden, is making that link. Well, no one this morning, Pat McFadden, is making that link, but one of your own MPs until late last night, and many other MPs who I've spoken to privately, as Rosie Duffield says, there is widespread concern in your party about the perception that has been created by the level of donations that have been accepted here. Do you understand that some people in your own party and many of our viewers look at this and think, what on earth were they thinking?
Well, I think the equivalence I referred to has been drawn in recent weeks. As I say, these were campaign donations, but let me be clear about what we'll do on this going forward. There's been an imbalance in the rules here between ministers and shadow ministers, where ministers have not had to declare in the past hospitality they've received, while backbench MPs and shadow ministers have. We will close that loophole going forward. We'll make it clear in the ministerial code that both ministers and shadow ministers should be under the same declaration rules going forward, so that everybody knows what is happening.
So you are now acknowledging that something has gone wrong here because you're going to tighten up the rules. Why has it taken you so long to realise that something needed to change? Well,
this was a Tory loophole brought in so that you'd have an event where the Tory minister, as it was under the last government, would be there. The Labour shadow opposite number would also be there. The Tory minister wouldn't have to declare. That was the Tory rules. We think that is not right, so we'll close that loophole and make sure that both ministers and shadow ministers are treated the same going forward.
How does changing that rule make a difference to the embarrassment that has driven many of our viewers round the twist and made Rosie Duffield very unhappy at how much, many thousands of pounds, you took in opposition? How much money Keir Starmer spent on clothes, free tickets? You yourself, I think, had free tickets to the Brit Awards. It may have been within the rules, but I think the thing many people struggle with is why you don't see this has made people so angry.
Look, politicians get invited to things. If people don't want politicians to go to anything in the future, then they can make that opinion clear. Politicians do get invited to things. Sometimes they go to things. Sometimes it might be relevant to their position. Sometimes it might not. In most of this was campaign donations. Presentation is part of a campaign. There is no policy quid pro quo here. There's no public money involved. This was about the campaign. It was about Labour putting its best foot forward in the campaign. Now that that campaign is over, we will make sure the ministerial code is clear in future so that ministers and shadow ministers operate under entirely the same rules.
But Rosie Duffield told us last night that Labour activists, Labour MPs feel that they are being laughed at because of the behaviour of Keir Starmer and the close team around him. Rosie Duffield told us the lads are in charge. Are you one of those lads, Pat McFadden?
I think I'm a bit too old to be a lad. Look, some of the stuff in the letter, I just don't accept. I see ministers turning up at work every day, and what's on their mind is how to stabilise the economy and get it growing again, how to turn around the NHS, how to get more houses built, how to improve rights at work for people, how to get more opportunity into schools. That's what the ministers around that cabinet table are focused on. They believe in public service.
But are you telling us this morning, Pat McFadden, there is no problem in number 10? Because it's not just Rosie Duffield's criticism in the last 24 hours. You and I both know there have been plenty of people in the party, privately and some publicly, expressing concerns about the operation of this new government. Keir Starmer's personal ratings have taken a big dive since he moved in. Are you telling our viewers this morning there is nothing up in Downing Street?
Look, I'm not denying I would rather not have seen some of the stories we've had in the last couple of weeks, but I've been around a long, long time. As I said, too old to be a lad maybe. And I remember when we came in 1997, there were also stories, there was talk of division between number 10 and 11, there was stories about donations then. There are some squalls at the moment, but this is a government with a big agenda. We've announced a lot so far, and there's plenty more to come in the future.
OK, I'm going to just raise briefly with you Lebanon. I don't know if you heard at the beginning of the programme, Pat McFadden, we talked to one of the Brits who is there, anxious about not being able to get home. The Foreign Office advice, which is important at the moment, is that people should get commercial flights out as soon as they can. But many flights are being cancelled. At what point, and we're showing people the advice on the screen, at what point will the government step in and get British citizens who want to leave onto government chartered planes or perhaps even military planes?
Well, this is a very serious situation right now. Our advice for some time now to British citizens in the Lebanon is to leave now. There are commercial flights available. The Foreign Office is working with commercial airlines to make sure more are available. We will plan for every contingency, but it's really important, given the seriousness of the situation, that British people in the area make what arrangements they can to leave now. There is a register your presence service to make sure that we know exactly who is British and who's in the area. I encourage anyone who's in the area to use that register your presence service. That's what gives us the information to then communicate with British citizens in the Lebanon. The advice is to leave now, but we are watching this very closely. We will have contingency plans in place for any eventuality. And on the broader question, it is really important that we try to resolve these differences in a diplomatic way, no matter how difficult that sounds in the light of what's happened in recent days.
OK, Pat McFadden, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Thank you. And that Foreign Office advice, of course, there's more information about that on the BBC website. Now then, let's talk about something different at the end, because who'd have thunk it? Boris Johnson is making his presence known at the Tory conference. I don't think he'll be here in person, but there are snippets coming out from his book that's about to land, and we're doing an interview with him, his first interview since he left office, about his time in office, this Thursday coming. Jake, you have been old mates with Boris Johnson for some time. How do you think the Tory party now looks at him? I mean, are people salaciously diving into what's coming out from his book?
Well, I think his book's going to be a good read, let's put it that way, and there's snippets coming out in the Mail. I still think the Conservative Party looks back at Boris Johnson when he came in as leader as a time of great optimism. He won a significant majority back for us in 2019, and I think as a very active member of the Conservative family that he still is, I think people would be delighted to see him here at conference.
Do you think do you think he should come, Penny?
I'm sure his book is a wholly accurate account of events. Talking of which,
according to Boris Johnson.
what Pat McFadden just said is completely untrue.
Oh,
And
okay.
he clearly
why did you say
doesn't
that?
understand the ministerial code at all. The onus on ministers is much more stringent and has been, and I as a minister reported monthly on my hospitality reporting. In 12 weeks, the Labour government's brought doubt to the economy, fear to the elderly, and I'm afraid a touch of Imelda Marcos to the office of Prime Minister.
You're accusing Keir Starmer of being like Imelda Marcos.
I am, Laura.
Goodness me, that's something I never thought a few weeks ago that we would have heard here. But just on that point about where the Tory party is now, I mean, Boris Johnson, I think, has said that he laughed at you at one point in Cabinet when you raised trans rights. What do you think of how he's behaving now?
Well, look, I think this is about all of us in this party, and I don't think that any of us should be fueling the divisions which characterised the last few years. I think the country wants us to get back into the service of them, and that should be our focus.
Tom, when you look at this new government, you know, somebody who's worked for different number 10s, and Pat McFadden having to acknowledge in his word there has been a squall when, you know, ministers have up until now tried to say, oh, there's nothing wrong, we're getting on, and saying they're already going to change the ministerial rules. Do you look at them as a government and think, oh, I'm confident they know what they're doing, or do you look at them and have a question mark?
Governing is really tough. I mean, I've seen that close up in number 10. I don't know whether Boris Johnson's book will help to restore our reputation for competence in the world.
Do you reckon it would?
Or not. The key thing is you get out there and do things. You don't just talk about it. You know, prime ministers need to set a clear vision. They need to communicate it well, and then put people and processes in place to actually then deliver it. Really hard to get all three of those things right. You know, I've only been into number 10 once since the election. I can see there are some very good people in there. I've worked with Sue Gray in the past. She's a formidable operator and will get stuff done. If I could just pivot to address the point on the crisis in Lebanon, though, because I saw Emma's interview earlier as well. I talked to the ambassador this morning. There's a great plan in place. There's a brilliant team in place, and people should get in touch with the embassy and get on those flights and get out.
OK, that's really important advice, and I'm afraid we're out of time. And we didn't even have time to go through the merchandise that the Tory candidates are trying to tempt people. Well, there's a Robert Jenrick tote bag, a Kemi Badenoch baseball cap. Maybe that's one for you there, Jake. I don't know if you want to try that on. Or it seems to be a foam finger. When did that become a thing in politics with Tom Tugendhat? Anyway, maybe we better bring this to a close, but you can argue about that amongst yourselves. Thank you to all of my guests this morning. Thank to you, most of all, of course, for watching. We've heard Cabinet Minister Pat McFadden say the government is going to change the rules on ministerial donations. Well, we'll see how the detail of that really pans out in the next few hours. And now we've heard on our programme all four of the candidates vying to be Tory leader. This week they'll be pressing the flesh and on the platforms in Birmingham in the next few days. And by Wednesday night, maybe one of them will appear to have the magic recipe to bring the Tory party back from the brink. Who knows? I'll be with Paddy O'Connell for Sunday's newscast on BBC Sounds a bit later on. And don't miss our interview with the former Prime Minister, Boris Johnson, his first on his time in office since his dramatic departure from Downing Street. That's on BBC One on Thursday night. And of course, after all that, I'll look forward to seeing you back in the studio next Sunday, same time, same place.
Live from London, this is BBC News. Fears of an all-out war in the Middle East after Israel kills Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. The Israeli Defense Forces say they've carried out raids on dozens of Hezbollah targets overnight. This is the scene live in Beirut, where officials say 33 people were killed and more than 200 injured in airstrikes on Saturday. At Westminster, Labour MP Rosie Duffield quits the party, accusing the Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, of hypocrisy. The Conservative leadership candidates are making their pitch for support at the party's annual conference. The polls have opened in Austria's federal election, which is expected to be a closely fought race, which could see the far-right Freedom Party win the most seats for the first time. Hello, I'm Geetha Gurumurthy. We start with the ongoing tensions in the Middle East, 24 hours since the announcement of the death of the Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah. Fears remain that Nasrallah's killing could spark an all-out regional war. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has described the attack as an historic turning point. He said Israel had finally settled the score with the man responsible for the murder of countless Israelis. Hassan Nasrallah had led the Iranian-backed group, prescribed as a terrorist group by Western and Arab governments, for over 30 years. Iran's supreme leader said his death would be avenged as the country called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council. Well, this is the scene live in Beirut at the moment. Israeli defence forces say they've carried out dozens of airstrikes on Hezbollah targets overnight. President Biden said the Hezbollah leader's death was a measure of justice, as he reiterated calls for both sides to accept the terms of a 21-day ceasefire. With the latest, here's Simon Jones.
The Israeli bombardment of Lebanon continues by night and by day. But the big question is, what will Israel, Hezbollah and the militant groups backer Iran do next? The Israeli Prime Minister described the killing of Hezbollah's leader on Friday as an historic turning point, but said his work is not done.
The state of Israel eliminated the master murderer Hassan Nasrallah. We settled accounts with the one responsible for the murder of countless Israelis and many citizens of other countries. Nasrallah was not another terrorist, he was the terrorist.
Hassan Nasrallah was the beating heart of Hezbollah, playing a key role in turning it into a political and military force. It described him as a martyr and vowed to continue its fight against Israel. Iran has declared 5 days of public mourning and said the death will not go unavenged. It's calling for a meeting of the UN Security Council. The cabinet in Lebanon met to condemn Israel.
The government is doing everything in its power to confront this destructive, hateful war that Israel is waging against us. And we went to the United Nations looking for a solution, and we met with the world leaders. But